there to the US Secretary of State John Kerry giving a wide-ranging speech on one of the world's most intractable issues, the Israel-Palestine peace agreement. Many issues touched on by Secretary of State Kerry, saying that the Jerusalem should be a capital for two states and that the current settlement building by Israel is putting any two-state solution in serious jeopardy. As I said, a wide-ranging speech by Mr. Kerry. Some words spoken by US Secretary of State that we haven't heard in terms of criticisms of both sides in the Israeli-Palestine situation, critical of both Israel and the Palestinian Authority in terms of them trying to garner peace. Well, for some more reaction on this, Colin Campbell is standing by for us in Washington and was listening into Mr. Kerry's speech. Colin, first of all, just your response to some of the things that John Kerry said. As I mentioned just a moment ago, it seems to me like some of the strongest words I've heard from a US Secretary of State on this issue.
Yeah, there was a lot to unpack there. And again, you heard Secretary of State John Kerry talk about the friendship that the United States has with Israel. But at the same time, some very sharp words, some very fervent rhetoric coming from the Secretary of State as he talked about some of the criticisms that the United States has of Israel and its settlement building policy. And what you heard him say is in reference to United States values. And he said, although the United States very much supports Israel and the people of Israel and tries to secure Israel's safety, it disagrees with Israel's current policy on continued settlement building. And he constantly compared U.S. values to the abstention from that United Nations vote where Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, sharply criticized the United States for what he feels was conspiring behind Israel's back and trying to get other countries to vote against Israel in that UN vote. So we heard Secretary of State talk for almost an hour about this issue, just talking about some of the ways that the United States has backed Israel and its Iron Dome program, and talked about how it spends more than half of its foreign military aid to Israel. Although he did not give an exact figure, or if he did, he only mentioned it about once, about how much the United States actually gives to Israel, that amounts to about $10 million a day. And the president had recently signed a 10-year, $38 billion aid program for Israel. So that is just something that is really in the backdrop of all this, just some of the monetary assistance that the United States is giving to Israel and is currently giving to Israel, and how the Secretary of State had talked about the United States' constant support of Israel, but at the same time criticizing some of the policies. He also said it was very personal to him, his tour of Golan Heights and swimming in the Dead Sea and touring the areas where he saw the people who were affected by some of the attacks that were committed to in the land of Israel and to the people of Israel. He talked about his personal connection and his personal experience being there. At the same time, he talked about some of his issues with the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, and talking about how they need to be more ameliorative of the policies that are standing as obstacles between Israel and the Palestinian people. So he wanted to show a balance there. He did not want to show that the U.S. is necessarily taking sides when it comes to Israel's security or the Palestinian people's security, but he did want to outline and highlight some of the issues that are standing on what he calls a roadblock to a two-state solution. And this has been consistent in the Obama administration's policy in trying to push for a two-state solution. He said that the U.S.'s belief, and especially the White House's belief, is that the settlements stand in the way of a two-state solution. And he said that those who are pushing for a one-state solution, to just have one Israel, that is going to be problematic for generations. He really said that the White House didn't believe that this was a resolution, that the push for this type of political process for a one-state solution would actually backfire and just set up a continued time, a continued precedent of aggression from Arab states. So again, after the U.S. received lots of criticism about its abstaining from that United Nations vote, here we have the Secretary of State outlining what is consistent with the Obama administration's policy, why the U.S. abstained from that vote, but at the same time showing that there is still a continued support of Israel by the United States, and that alliance between the U.S. and Israel should continue for generations.
Absolutely, and that friendship was questioned, of course, as you mentioned, by Netanyahu after the abstention on that vote, saying friends don't take friends to the Security Council. Now, the timing of this, Colin, is vital. Not only does it come after the vote, it comes in the dying embers of the Obama administration and before we have the Trump administration, and who knows what that's going to bring. But what we do know is that Donald Trump has picked a hawk as his ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, a man who, as I understand it, does believe in a one-state solution. So it's almost as if Mr. Kerry and Mr. Obama are trying to get ahead of this, lay down their feelings before Trump comes in and perhaps tears it all up.
And that's why you heard Secretary of State Kerry mention the vote. He said basically at the Reagan administration, back in 1986, there was a similar vote where the U.S. voted similarly. And so there was already a precedent that was set. This is This is nothing new. This is not a change of U.S. policy in the Obama administration, but something that the U.S. has really been consistent on for decades. And again, like what you said before, this alludes to this transition that's happening. Many people have criticized President-elect Trump for overstepping his boundaries, for superseding his role as president-elect and not yet president, but still almost acting as a president, trying to set up what the relationship would be between Israel and the U.S. when he does indeed become president. So we heard Secretary of State Kerry outline basically what the Obama administration had hoped during its time when it was trying to negotiate peace agreements between Palestinians and Israelis, and trying to outline for the American people what they should try to push for once the Obama administration is no longer. However, there are many who are in fear that the two-state solution would be in jeopardy once President-elect Trump does indeed become president of the United States. And like you said, picking someone such as David Friedman, who is seen as very hawkish, someone who is very anti the interests of the Palestinians, and someone who is going to promote a one-state solution, thereby nullifying any types of overtures that the Obama administration has been making over the past 8 years to try to solidify a two-state solution, which they believe would really ameliorate some of the aggression and the discontent between both nations, between the Israelis and Palestinians.
Okay, Colin, in Washington, thank you. Well, for the reaction from Israel, let's speak to Greg Karlstrom. He's standing by for us in Tel Aviv. Greg, good to speak to you. First of all, just your reaction to what you heard from John Kerry.
Well, on the one hand, I agree. Some of the language in there was almost unprecedented for a U.S. administration. He talked about Israel being unable to choose between being Jewish and being democratic in a possible one state. He called that future one state separate but unequal, which evokes the U.S. civil rights movement. He was very critical of Israeli settlements. Some of the language, again, without precedent from a Secretary of State. On the other hand, the parameters that he outlined towards the end, in many ways similar to the parameters that Bill Clinton outlined in 2000 in a similar speech towards the end of his presidency. Those parameters have been well known for many, many years now. Everyone knows the contours of a two-state solution, and it hasn't made much difference in terms of actually implementing one.
No, it hasn't. And Greg, I mean, as you say, unprecedented language used by Secretary of State Kerry, but how will it be received in Israel? Of course, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu wouldn't be pushing through these settlement arrangements if he didn't have support of the Israeli people, the majority of the Israeli people. So how will these tough words go down in Israel?
Probably not very well. I think there are two things to watch, or two camps to watch here. One of them is the Israeli right. Kerry mentioned Netanyahu a number of times by name, but the Israeli politician that he quoted the most was actually Naftali Bennett, the head of the right-wing pro-settler Jewish Home Party. And midway through the speech, Bennett actually tweeted out a response to it, and he was pleased that Kerry was quoting him as an opponent of the two-state solution. He said, "It's true, I don't support two states." in Israel and Palestine. So the issue going forward for the Israeli right is going to be there's going to be a debate in the wake of this Security Council resolution about building more in the settlements, about possibly annexing part of the occupied West Bank and making it permanently Israeli territory, which would eliminate any chance for a Palestinian state. Netanyahu, at least officially, rhetorically, he opposes that. He supports the two-state solution, again, in words at least, or in public. Bennett is an advocate of a one-state solution. The two of them are certainly going to have a very public argument in the weeks and months to come. The other question is how the opposition will respond to this. There really has not been much of an opposition in Israel on these issues for a number of years. The left tends to avoid talking about the peace process. They think it's a losing issue politically. They think most Israelis either hold right-wing views on the subject or just don't care. They care more about socioeconomic issues. So we'll have to wait and see what kind of response there is from the center-left in Israel. Much of what Kerry said are things that the Israeli peace camp used to say, spent decades saying, criticizing the occupation, criticizing the settlements, but they've really ceased to be a political force in Israel over the past 10 or 15 years, and they may not have much of a response to this speech.
And finally then, Greg, of course, we must speak about the Palestinians. There were some harsh words for both Fatah and Hamas from Mr. Kerry, saying that they glorify some terrorists and they're not doing anything to help themselves develop the two-state solution. But how do you think that what Mr. Kerry has said here will go down with the Palestinian Authority? Will they be buoyed by this and feel like they have the support of the US going forward? Or do you think they'll be slightly concerned still that these are just warm words and perhaps nothing's going to happen?
I think they'll be very pleased with the words. Many of the things that Kerry said are things that Palestinian negotiators, Palestinian officials have been saying for decades now. But I don't think they'll be that buoyed because in about 23 days, Kerry is going to have no relevance here whatsoever. And we have a new administration coming in Washington. It's still an open question exactly how Donald Trump is going to approach the peace process. He's taken a very pro-Israeli line on the campaign trail. He has a nominee for ambassador to Israel who is an open supporter of both settlements and annexing the West Bank. But on the other hand, Trump has certainly had a history of going back on his word throughout the campaign. So we don't know exactly how he will behave, but the Palestinians are not optimistic. The mood in Ramallah is that after January 20th, there's going to be a very hostile administration in Washington. They don't think there's going to be any major push for peace. So they're certainly happy to hear these words from John Kerry, but I think they would wish they heard these words about 8 years ago.
Absolutely. Okay, Greg, for now in Tel Aviv, thanks very much.